There's something about old antiques that draws you in. I've always loved the stories they carry, the secrets whispered through the ages. My name is James Parker, and for over 2 decades, I've owned a quaint little antique shop nestled in the heart of New Orleans. The smell of aged wood and the feel of history under your fingertips, it's intoxicating. People say I have a knack for finding the most unusual pieces, and they're right. But there was one item I stumbled upon that I wish I had left untouched. It was a chilly, overcast morning when I found it at an estate sale. This mirror, with its intricate carvings and glass that seemed as old as time, spoke to me in a way that I couldn't ignore. Bringing it back to my shop, I placed it in the far corner, right where the light would catch its edges just so. There was something mesmerizing about it. The way it reflected not just your image, but seemed to hold something deeper, something unseen. I often wondered about its previous owners, what lives it had witnessed, what secrets it had kept. You see, I've always believed that objects, especially those as old as this mirror, absorb a bit of the energy of their surroundings. But with this mirror, it felt different. It was as if it wasn't just absorbing energy. It was holding onto it, clinging to it with a desperate grip. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, I've seen a lot of strange things in my line of work, items with odd histories, pieces that give you a chill when you touch them. But this mirror was unique. It had a presence, almost like it was aware. I'd find myself staring into it, losing track of time, drawn into its depths. And sometimes, just for a split second, I thought I saw something move. But it was subtle, like a trick of the light or a shadow passing by. I'd shake it off, tell myself it was just my imagination running wild, but a part of me knew better. The days went on, and the mirror continued to unsettle me. I'd catch myself glancing over at it, feeling its pull. Customers would come in, drawn to its craftsmanship, but none stayed too long near it. There was a palpable unease about it, a tension that filled the room whenever someone stood before it. They'd compliment its beauty, yet quickly move away, their eyes lingering with a sense of discomfort. And every time after they left, I'd find myself standing before it, trying to see what they saw, or perhaps what I was beginning to feel. Then, one evening, just as I was about to close up shop, I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. There was a smudge on the glass, not like a fingerprint or a smudge of dust, but something more. Deliberate. It was a handprint, faint and cold, pressed against the inside of the glass. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. How could that be? No one had touched the mirror. I reached out to wipe it away, but as my hand got closer, I swear I felt the glass pulse, almost like a heartbeat, slow and deep. I jerked my hand back, my heart pounding in my chest. From that moment, everything changed. The mirror seemed to come alive, its reflections no longer matching reality. I'd see flashes of movement, shadows darting just out of sight. The air around it grew colder, and I began to feel a presence, something lurking just beyond the surface. I tried to ignore it, to brush it off as fatigue or stress, but it was impossible. The mirror had a hold on me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, waiting for the right moment to show me what lay within its depths. The nights grew longer, and the shadows deeper, as I realized I had brought something into my life that I couldn't understand and couldn't escape. At first, it was easy to brush off the strange occurrences as mere tricks of the mind. I mean, who hasn't imagined shadows moving in the corner of their eye when they're tired or alone? The mirror stood in its corner, seemingly innocent, but I knew better. The first few days were just odd. I'd catch a glimpse of something in the reflection, a fleeting shadow, a hint of movement just enough to make me look twice. Each time, there was nothing. It was as if the mirror was playing with me, teasing me with these almost visions, making me question my own sanity. But then, things started to escalate. I'd be working late, the shop quiet and dimly lit, when I'd suddenly feel a cold breeze sweep across the room, even though the windows were shut tight. And then, in the stillness, I'd hear it, a faint whisper, almost like a sigh, coming from the direction of the mirror. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was the wind or the old building settling. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something that didn't belong. Every time I walked past that corner, I felt a strange pull, like the mirror was trying to draw me in. One night, while locking up, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure standing right behind me in the reflection. My heart stopped, and I spun around, only to find the shop empty. I laughed nervously, shaking it off, but I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe a trick of the light, but my gut was screaming that it was something more. The more I tried to ignore it, the more persistent the occurrences became. It was like the mirror knew I was resisting and was pushing harder to get my attention. I started seeing things more clearly, figures, shapes that didn't belong, reflections that moved when nothing else did. I'd stand there, staring into the glass, trying to catch whatever it was in the act, but every time it seemed just out of reach. The frustration was growing, a gnawing feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was terribly wrong. I began to dread closing time, knowing that as the light faded, the mirror's activity would intensify. The shadows in the shop seemed to stretch longer, darker, and I could feel eyes on me, even when I was alone. It got to the point where I couldn't concentrate on anything else. Customers would come in, asking about some antique or another, but all I could think about was the mirror and what it might show me next. I was starting to lose sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what was happening and why. Then came the night that changed everything. I was getting ready to leave, flipping the sign to closed, when I heard a distinct, sharp knock. It wasn't at the door, but from behind me. I turned, and there, in the mirror, was the reflection of a man I didn't recognize, standing in the middle of the shop. His eyes were dark, void of life, and his face twisted into a sinister smile. I gasped, stumbling back, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I turned around, there was no one there. The shop was empty, silent as a tomb. From that moment on, I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The mirror wasn't just showing me reflections. It was showing me something else, something not of this world. The line between reality and illusion was beginning to blur, and I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I had to know what was happening, what the mirror wanted, and most importantly, what was lurking just beyond its glassy surface, waiting to be seen. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to confront whatever was hiding in that mirror. The shop felt different after that night, colder, darker, as if the very walls were holding their breath. It was almost as if the mirror had come alive, its surface rippling with secrets just waiting to be revealed. I decided to take a closer look, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could figure out what was happening. It was late, the shop was empty, and the only light came from a flickering street lamp outside. I approached the mirror slowly, my heart racing with a mix of fear and curiosity. Standing before it, I felt a chill run down my spine. I could see my breath fogging up the glass, even though it wasn't cold. The air around me grew heavier, and a strange silence filled the room, pressing in on my ears. As I stared into the mirror, I noticed something odd. The reflection didn't quite match reality. It was subtle at first, just a slight distortion, like looking through a warped piece of glass. But then I realized, with a growing sense of dread, that it wasn't just the glass. The entire room in the reflection was shifting, changing, like it was alive. And then I saw it. A face, pale and ghostly, appeared in the corner of the mirror. Its eyes were hollow, staring back at me with a cold, calculating gaze. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, my legs trembling beneath me. The face didn't move, didn't blink, just stared with a look of pure malice. I wanted to run, to turn away, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away. It was like the mirror was holding me captive, forcing me to confront whatever was lurking within its depths. The longer I stared, the more I could feel a presence in the room with me, something dark and sinister. The air grew colder still, and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I knew I had to get out, to break free from whatever spell the mirror had cast over me. But as I turned to leave, I felt a sudden rush of air, like something moving past me, and the door slammed shut with a loud bang. I was trapped, alone in the dark with the thing in the mirror. Panic set in, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. I tried to unlock the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was like something was holding it shut, keeping me there with the mirror. I turned back to face it, and that's when I saw it. The face had moved closer, right up against the glass, its eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a jolt of fear through my body. I could feel its hatred, its anger, pouring out of the mirror, wrapping around me like a suffocating fog. I knew then that this was no ordinary haunting. The mirror was a portal, a window to another world, and whatever was on the other side wanted out. It wanted into our world, into my life, and it was using me to do it. I had to find a way to break the connection, to sever the link before it was too late. But how? How do you fight something you can't see, can't touch, something that exists just beyond the veil of reality? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. I knew I couldn't leave, not yet. I had to find out what the mirror was showing me, what it wanted me to see. Maybe there was a way to close the portal, to send whatever was inside back where it came from. Or maybe, just maybe, there was no way out. The only thing I knew for certain was that the face in the mirror wasn't going away, and neither was I. Not until I got some answers. After that night, nothing was the same. The face in the mirror haunted me, lingering in the corners of my mind, even when I wasn't looking at it. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hollow eyes staring back at me. I felt like I was being watched constantly, even when I was alone. My shop, once a place of comfort and familiarity, had become a prison of sorts, its walls closing in with each passing day. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was not alone, that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting. The nightmares began soon after. They were vivid, more real than dreams had any right to be. I would find myself standing in front of the mirror, but the shop around me was different, darker, colder, with shadows that seemed to move on their own. The face was always there, just behind me, its eyes boring into my soul. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the image burned into my mind. It was like the mirror was reaching out to me, pulling me deeper into its twisted world. I tried to ignore it, to carry on with my life as if everything was normal, but it was impossible. The mirror seemed to call to me, its presence a constant weight on my shoulders. I began to notice changes in myself, subtle at first, but growing more pronounced with each passing day. I was jumpy, paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder. My friends started to notice too, asking if I was okay, if I needed to talk. But how could I explain what was happening without sounding crazy? How could I tell them that a mirror was haunting me, that I was being watched by something I couldn't even see? The worst part was the reflection. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. I'd look into the mirror and see myself, but something was off. My reflection seemed different. The eyes were darker, the expression colder, more sinister. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my face. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. The more I looked, the more I was convinced that the person staring back at me wasn't me at all. I began avoiding the mirror, going out of my way to stay out of its line of sight. But it didn't matter. I could feel its pull, even when I wasn't looking at it. It was always there, just on the edge of my awareness, whispering to me in a voice I couldn't quite hear. I knew I should get rid of it, throw it out, sell it, anything to get it out of my life. But every time I tried, something stopped me. It was like the mirror had a hold on me, a grip that I couldn't break no matter how hard I tried. People around me began to notice my descent into paranoia. I was jumpy, irritable, snapping at friends and customers for no reason. They'd ask if I was okay, if something was wrong, but what could I say? How could I explain that I was being tormented by a mirror, that I was seeing things that couldn't possibly be real? I started avoiding people too, shutting myself off from the world, retreating into the solitude of my shop. But even there, I wasn't safe. The mirror was always watching, always waiting, its presence a constant, suffocating weight on my chest. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I had to do something, had to find a way to break free from the mirror's hold. But how? I was lost, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I needed to figure out what the mirror wanted, what it was trying to show me. I needed to find a way to end this, once and for all, before it was too late. The shadows were closing in, and I was running out of time. One stormy night, everything changed. The weather outside was fierce, with lightning flashing across the sky and thunder rumbling so loudly that it felt like the whole world was shaking. The wind howled through the cracks in the old shop's windows, and the rain beat down like a relentless drum. I was alone in the shop, the only light coming from a small lamp on my desk and the occasional burst of lightning. I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. I knew that something was coming, something I couldn't stop. As I sat there, trying to focus on my work, a blinding flash of lightning struck so close that the whole shop lit up like daylight for a split second. Then, just as suddenly, everything went dark. The power was out. I reached for a flashlight, my hands trembling, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. I turned towards the mirror, and that's when I saw it. The glass was glowing, emitting a faint, eerie light that seemed to pulse in time with the storm outside. My heart skipped a beat, fear gripping me like a vice. I felt an inexplicable pull towards the mirror, a magnetic force that drew me closer, despite every instinct screaming at me to run. As I approached, the glow intensified, and I could see the reflection shifting, warping like a living thing. My breath fogged up the glass, and for a moment, I could see my own terrified face staring back at me. But then, the image changed. The glass seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by a pebble, and a vortex began to form in the center, swirling with a dark, otherworldly light. It was a portal, a gateway to somewhere I didn't want to go. I could see shadows moving within it, dark shapes that seemed to reach out, clawing at the boundary between their world and mine. I wanted to turn and run, to get as far away from that mirror as possible, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped by a force I couldn't see, couldn't understand. My mind raced, panic setting in as I realized that whatever was in that mirror was trying to cross over, and I was powerless to stop it. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one, just the dark, empty shop and the rain pounding against the windows. I turned back to the mirror, and the figures were closer now, their shapes more defined, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. They were reaching out to me, their hands pressing against the glass, pushing, straining to break through. I could feel their hunger, their desperation. They wanted out, and they were using me as the key. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows and sending a shiver down my spine. I knew I had to do something, had to find a way to stop whatever was happening before it was too late. But what could I do? How do you fight something you can't even touch? My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. I was out of options, out of time. The portal was opening, the barrier between our worlds thinning with each passing second. I reached out, almost instinctively, my hand hovering just above the surface of the mirror. I could feel a strange warmth emanating from it, a heat that shouldn't have been there. The glass was vibrating, humming with an energy that made my skin crawl. I knew that if I touched it, something would happen, something I couldn't take back. But I was drawn to it, pulled towards it like a moth to a flame. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next, and pressed my hand against the glass. As soon as I did, a shockwave of energy surged through me, knocking me back. I stumbled, falling to the floor, the wind knocked out of me. The mirror's light flared brighter than before, and the figures within seemed to scream in silent fury. I knew then that I had made a terrible mistake, one that I couldn't undo. The portal was open, and there was no going back. The storm outside raged on, a perfect backdrop for the chaos unfolding within the shop. And I was left to wonder what would happen next, what horrors would emerge from the depths of that cursed mirror. The next morning, I woke up to a different kind of dread. As soon as I opened my eyes, I felt an inexplicable heaviness in the air, like something sinister had settled in overnight. The shop was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you think twice about breaking it. I sat up, my head pounding with the echoes of the night before. It wasn't just a bad dream. I could still feel the coldness in my bones, the strange energy coursing through my veins. I needed to see if what happened was real or just a trick of my tired mind. I hesitated at first, but eventually I made my way to the shop's main room. Everything looked untouched, almost normal except for the mirror. The glass was covered in deep scratches, as if something had tried to claw its way out. My stomach twisted at the sight. These weren't ordinary scratches. They were deliberate, frantic, like whatever was inside the mirror was desperate to escape. I reached out, my fingers trembling, but the surface was cold and smooth, betraying no hint of the violence that had occurred. My reflection didn't seem right either. It wasn't following my movements. It just stood there, staring back at me with a twisted grin that didn't belong to me. I blinked, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the background, a shadow darting out of sight. I spun around, my heart racing, but the room was empty. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine. The mirror wasn't just a window to another world. It was becoming a part of mine. I tried to cover the mirror, thinking maybe that would keep whatever was inside from getting out. I grabbed an old sheet and threw it over the glass, but as soon as I turned away, the sheet slid off, as if pushed by an unseen hand. I tried again and again. The same thing happened. It was like the mirror was alive, rejecting my efforts to contain it. My frustration grew, my fear turning into anger. I wanted to smash the mirror, to break it into 1,000 pieces and be done with it. But something stopped me, an instinct, a gut feeling that told me that breaking the mirror would only make things worse. I spent the rest of the day avoiding the corner of the shop, trying to focus on anything else. But it was impossible. The presence of the mirror loomed over me, its energy palpable. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside felt amplified, like the whole building was holding its breath. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that eyes were following my every move. I checked the doors and windows, making sure they were locked, but deep down, I knew that locks wouldn't keep out whatever was in that mirror. As night fell, the tension in the air grew thicker. I tried to leave, to get some distance from the shop and clear my head, but every time I reached for the door, I felt a strange resistance, like an invisible barrier was keeping me in. It was then that I realized I wasn't just trapped by the mirror. I was trapped in it. The lines between our world and whatever was on the other side were blurring, and I was caught in the middle. I needed to find a way out, to sever the connection before it was too late. The sounds began soon after, soft at first, like whispers carried on the wind. Then they grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to communicate with me. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening, but I couldn't make out the words. They were muffled, distorted, as if coming from a great distance. I knew they were coming from the mirror, that whatever was inside was trying to reach out, to pull me in. I backed away, my heart racing, my mind spinning with questions. What did it want? Why was it here? And more importantly, how could I stop it? I couldn't answer any of those questions, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't face this alone. I needed help, someone who understood these things, who could tell me what I was dealing with. But who? Who could I trust with something like this? I was running out of options, out of time, and I could feel the darkness closing in, pressing down on me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I needed to make a decision, and fast, before the mirror decided for me. I knew I needed to do something, anything, to take control of this situation. I couldn't keep living in fear of my own shop, my own reflection. The storm outside was relentless, but the storm inside my mind was worse. I found myself pacing, my thoughts a chaotic mess of what-ifs and maybes. I knew I had to get closer to the mirror again, to understand it, even though every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay away. There was no denying it any longer. The mirror was a gateway, a passage to a place that defied all logic. As the night deepened, the mirror began to glow again, but this time it was different. The light wasn't just a faint glow. It was a pulsating, almost hypnotic beacon. I could feel it in my chest, each pulse matching the frantic beat of my heart. I inched closer, drawn by some invisible force that I couldn't resist. The glass seemed to shimmer, and the room around me felt like it was fading away. It was just me and the mirror, locked in a silent dance of shadows and light. I reached out, my hand trembling as it moved towards the surface of the glass. As soon as my fingertips touched it, a cold shock ran through my body, like plunging into icy water. I tried to pull back, but my hand was stuck, glued to the glass by an unseen force. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't move. The mirror's glow intensified, and I could see shapes moving within it, swirling and twisting like smoke in the wind. These weren't just shadows. They were figures, beings from another realm, and they were getting closer. The mirror began to hum, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through my bones. It was as if the entire world was vibrating with it, a deep, primal sound that seemed to reach into my very soul. I could feel the presence of the beings inside, their intentions dark and unfathomable. They were trying to communicate, but not with words. It was more like a feeling, a sense of dread and foreboding that seeped into every part of me. I closed my eyes, trying to block it out, but it was useless. I was connected to the mirror now, a part of whatever dark force it harbored. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the mirror's surface rippled like water. The glow intensified, and I could see the figures more clearly now. They were grotesque, distorted, their faces twisted into expressions of pain and anger. Their hands reached out towards me, pressing against the glass as if trying to break through. I could hear their screams, faint but unmistakable, a chorus of torment that echoed in my mind. I knew then that they weren't just images or reflections. They were souls, trapped in a purgatory of glass and shadow. I pulled with all my strength, finally breaking free from the mirror's grasp. I stumbled back, breathing heavily, my heart racing. The room was spinning, the world around me a blur of shadows and light. I could still feel the cold of the glass on my skin, a lingering reminder of the connection I had just severed. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the mirror, afraid that if I looked away, it would pull me back in. I knew I had to act fast to find a way to close the portal before it was too late. I grabbed a heavy cloth from the counter and threw it over the mirror, hoping to block its influence to hide it from view. But as soon as the cloth touched the glass, it burst into flames, disintegrating into ash in an instant. I jumped back, shocked and terrified, realizing that whatever was in that mirror was far more powerful than I had imagined. It was playing with me, toying with my fear, and I was helpless to stop it. I was out of options, out of ideas, and the mirror's glow was growing stronger, more insistent. The shadows in the room seemed to grow darker, longer, stretching towards me like claws. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help, and I needed it fast. But who could I turn to? Who would believe me? As I stood there, paralyzed by fear and indecision, I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, and the mirror began to hum again, louder this time, like a beast awakening from a long slumber. It wasn't done with me yet, not by a long shot.